So I seem to get to run out of between he wants to go home and stuff. Yeah, it's crazy.
I have to leave a few minutes early so I get home before my husband's going to take my car to work.
Oh,
So I'll give him plenty of time to get there.
Plenty of time.
Yeah. I better sit down.
Oh, did he?
Hi. Thanks for all the updates. Thanks. Yeah.
Thanks for bringing it.
Absolutely. So quiet. Hi. Like two people.
You gonna be into it?
Nice light reading.
Hi, Dale. Hi.
Yeah.
I started listening to the
Yeah.
Have you seen it before? Yeah, that was the first time. We tried to get to the last two.
No idea.
Yeah.
I don't think I read any.
That was the second time we said
Yeah, I don't think it's
Was he?
One of our really
I'm like, sometimes I'll start reading that. I can't take it seriously. Or I'm like, yeah. I can't do that either.
I love playing volleyball.
He's just one.
He said he'd like to sell it and then work
Yeah,
for a while.
Yep.
Yeah.
A lot of people do that as consultants.
Little world.
There's some communities that you actually
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I feel like some things like, well,
I don't know where to start, but it seems like a great one.
So I'm on some
Really?
That's cool. I'm trying to find, I have no idea in here.
All right, y'all. Good evening.
Yep.
Welcome. Thank you for coming out on a very snowy, stormy blizzard night. We always try to gauge, do we cancel or not? And so we were here till 4, and then I took off at 4 and did a couple things before coming back here. And at 4 o'clock, it was not bad. So by the time we started thinking about maybe we should cancel tonight, it was about 5:30, and I was a little late then to cancel it. So welcome for the 4 of you. I'm kidding. The 15 or 16 or 18 of you that are here. If you're watching online, we do have. Whoa, we have a problem with the camera. Well, if you're watching online, you get the big version of me, I guess, tonight. So. Yeah, we'll try to figure that out. Does anyone have Kyle Young's phone number in their phone? Could you text Kyle Young right now? Maybe he's watching. Kyle, could you zoom the camera out a little bit so it's not just my head from the screen, which looks a little awkward to everybody. So anyway, if you could have Kyle. What? Was that like that for men's? All right, a little awkward for everybody, but we'll make it work tonight. So we're glad you're here. Thanks for coming. I thought for a moment here that maybe I'd just punt on tonight's topic and do an impromptu Q&A, but that's an option. We could do that, but I think at this point we're just going to move ahead with the class. You're here, and you came to talk about biblical friendship. So we're going to talk about biblical friendship tonight. Thanks for another topic, praying for me. I'm feeling about 90%. I'm not contagious anymore. I'm on an antibiotic. So my voice is struggling a little bit, but we'll I think, be able to get through class tonight. So thank you for coming. Just a reminder, there's no class. There is class next week, and then we're off for 2 weeks. So we'll be meeting next Wednesday the 18th, and then we'll be off, obviously, for Christmas and New Year's Day. So that's our schedule. Let me pray. We'll begin. Lord, thank you for this time. Thank you for each of these folks that have ventured out in the weather tonight and come, and thank you that we get to enjoy an evening together talking through your truth and opening your word. And we pray that you will bless our discussion, bless our time together. Lord, enable us to learn the things that you want us to learn, particularly about this issue of relationships and friendships and what your word has to say about that. So we commit our time to you now in Christ's name. Amen. All right, so remember what we're doing in this class. We've called this Theology for Life, and we're just kind of collecting a collection of topics. We started with 3 weeks on discipleship and then 3 weeks on emotions, and now we're doing a little 5-week. It was supposed to be 3 weeks, but now a 5-week little section here on relationships. And so we took some time on forgiveness and conflict, and we introduced the topic of relationships. And so now we want to deal a little bit tonight on the issue of biblical friendship. And I was kind of interested in this topic a few years ago when we preached through Proverbs. Remember that when you were, most of you I think were here, we preached the book of Proverbs. That was in COVID, and I remember standing here preaching to an empty room with nobody in it, and we finished Proverbs, I think, in COVID. And so there was a number of topical Proverbs that I wanted to hit, and because of COVID and just for whatever reason, we didn't get to this topic of friendship. And Proverbs has a lot to say about this issue. So it's kind of been on the back burner for a few years, just kind of in the back of my head, thinking at some point I'd like to think about what biblical friendship looks like. And so that's kind of how this came about, thinking through this little section on relationships, and thought that this would probably be a good place for us to talk about this. So with 16 or 17 or whatever are here, you're going to get a chance to interact a little bit more and engage a little bit more. So feel free to talk, ask questions. Let me just jump in here, but at the top, why are we talking about this? Why would we take some time to address this issue? And I would say that friendship is not optional. If you're a human, if you're alive, and particularly if you're a believer, you need to think about this topic. So we've talked about the fact that God has designed us for relationships. That whole section on the first page there is kind of stuff we've talked about before, that God has designed us for relationships. He's not designed us to live isolated lives. He's not wanting us to live Lone Ranger Christian lives. He's created us and designed us to be social beings, social creatures. And so he wants us to engage with one another and relate to one another. And particularly one of the ways that we do that is through the existence of friendships. So part of being made in the image of God is this, that we are relational creatures. So we're made in his image. He's spiritual, we're spiritual. He's eternal, we're eternal. He's emotional in one sense, we're emotional. And he's relational, and we're relational. So as we think about the image of God in us, that's what we're talking about. Those are some of the elements of it. And so part of that is being relational beings. So Genesis 2, obviously God says on the 6th day, it's not good for man to be alone. And I think that's a statement not just about Adam's need for a wife. I think it's also a statement on the fact that God has not designed people to live in isolation. So it's a statement about God's design for humanity. He's not created us to live in solitude. And you know, of course, that God created the woman to be a companion to the man, and as a result of that, then marriage took place. But all of that, there's a bigger thing going on here, and that's that God has designed us to be social creatures. Right in the middle of the page here, while that text relates directly to the creation of Eve, it also functions as a statement about the nature of mankind. In that sense, nothing has changed to this day. The need for relationships remains. And then a quote here from Tripp's book on relationships. He says, just as human beings were created with a vertical need for God's companionship, they are also created for the horizontal companionship of other people. Genesis 2 points to the fact that relationships are a core component of who God designed you to be. So just think about that. You're not designed to live in isolation. You may want to sometimes pull back from people. You may just say, I've had enough. I need a break. I want to pull back from these relationships because they're too painful or they're too difficult. And obviously, that's a part of this, but God does not want you to swing the pendulum the other way and live in isolation. So that's how He's designed you to be. He's designed you to have friends. He wants you to have friends. As a believer in particular, He has designed you to have friends. And what's interesting to me is that the word friend actually is used by God and by Christ to refer to us. Now think about this. There's this vertical friendship that exists between God and His people. Normally we think of friendship simply on the horizontal plane, but the word friends actually occurs in Scripture to refer to a vertical friendship between God and His people. Now, not unbelievers, but believers. So look at Exodus 33:11. The Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, just as a man speaks to his friend. So God compares His relationship with Moses to a friendship relationship on the horizontal plane. Similarly, in Isaiah 41, it says, you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, descendant of Abraham, my friend. God calls Abraham His friend. Why? Because He justified Abraham. He credited it to him as righteousness, and he was in a right relationship with God. And so God could literally call him His friend. So, I mean, just let that sink in for just a moment. That is tremendous. That God would call His people, you and me, if you're rightly related to the Lord, you're His friend. You're not His enemy. You're not at odds with Him anymore. You are literally God's friend. Interestingly, Christ also uses this term to refer to His disciples. Luke 12, He says to them, I say to you, my friends, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, and after that have no more that they can do. And then in John 15, He says, greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. And then look at verse 14. He says, you are my friends if you do what I command you. Then verse 15, He says at the end, but I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you. So here's Jesus referring to the 12, which, by the way, included Judas. But He does call them as a group His friends. So tremendous thing for us to consider, the fact that if you belong to Christ, you are His friend. And actually, you're His brother. So that says something about what this friendship can and should be. It speaks of the dynamic. It speaks of the intimacy. It speaks of the fact that we're not distant from Him anymore. There's a closeness, there's an affection, there's a joy, there's relational harmony. So before we even dive into the whole horizontal kind of understanding of friendship, we need to think about this vertical element as well. So bottom of page 1, Christ came to make those who were His enemies into His spiritual friends. And look at the top of page 2, we used to be His enemies. Right? That's what Romans 5 tells us. While we were enemies, we were reconciled to God. So there was this formerly alienated relationship, which has now been reconciled because of Christ, because of His work, because of justification, because of what He's accomplished. That vertical relationship has now been healed, so that now there can be this friendship that exists between God and us. Look at the second bullet down on page 2. The result then ought to be deep, close friendships which develop between believers as they grow together in the church. So here's what we're getting at. If God can call you His friend, if Christ can call you His friend, relationally and in a salvific way, then what does that say about our ability and our need to have friends as well and to work at those friendships? So the horizontal reconciliation results then in the ability for there to be friendships on the horizontal plane. In fact, in Hebrews 10, I think we're even summoned to this. It's a call to friendships, I think, not forsaking our own assembling together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. So this speaks of this closeness, the one another's, these relationships that ought to exist between believers. Now, it doesn't mean you can be friends with everybody. Now, we're not going to go down that road. We're not going to say that you need to be friends with everybody. You can't do that. Jesus had 12 who were his friends. And of those 12, only three of them were very close. And of those three, one of them was super close in Peter. So all that to say, just the need for friendship, I think we can establish biblically and theologically that there is a need for you to have friends. You shouldn't be a Lone Ranger Christian, and God actually wants you to have friends. So any thoughts on that so far? Questions? Agree? Disagree? Got it.
Is the focus in Hebrews more on the local church, or is it more broad for the church?
Yeah, so the question is the focus in Hebrews 10:25 focus on a local church or the broad universal church? I would probably say yes to both of those, because biblically, the believers are to assemble together, but where do they do that? They do that in a local church, right? You can't assemble with all universal believers. You do that in a local assembly. So the application, I think, of Hebrews 10:25 is your own local church. So, yeah. Other thoughts on any of this introductory stuff? Yeah, Dan.
Sometimes I find myself assuming that I understand a word, especially when we use it commonly. And so I just want to make sure that I understand what we're talking about when we say friend. Would you like to offer any additional or any definition for friend? I think when I think of it, what comes to mind is someone that you know, that you have, then there's mutual affection there.
Yeah.
Is that what we're talking about? Is there something more, something less?
Yeah, good question. So what is a friend? I mean, in a sense, I think you can say or should say that every believer is in a sense a friend. You can go anywhere in the world and you can find believers and you can have a relationship with them, right? And there can be a sweetness of fellowship. So I think in a very general, broad sense of the term, any fellow believer can be a friend of sorts. But if we look at the more narrow definition of it, I think you're getting at to what you're getting at, and that is that you can't be friends with the world, you can't be friends with every Christian, you can't even be friends with every person in our church. Mm-hmm. So there are going to be certain people that you gravitate to, they gravitate to you. There's a closeness, there's an affection, there's a mutually encouraging relationship that develops between you and a small group of people. Like I said, I don't think you can be friends with more, really good friends, more than 10, 12, 15 people, maybe not even that much. So I think we're talking in a very narrow sense, those people that you can develop those close relationships with, where there's mutual encouragement, where there's a sharing of life, where there's an openness and a transparency about the struggles of life, those kinds of things. You're not going to open yourself up like that to everybody, but there are going to be some key individuals in your life that you can do that with. So I'm kind of answering your question in both ways. I think there's a broad sense of the term, but maybe what we're going to do tonight is we're going to look at the more narrow sense of the term. So does that help? Okay, good. All right, so trying to establish the fact that we should have friends, there should be people in our life that we could say, this person is a close friend of mine as a fellow believer. However, having said that, there are a number of factors, I think, that mitigate against it, that you just have to be aware of. So this is still kind of introductory. There are some issues that make it maybe more difficult to develop friendships in our culture, in our society. So look at the first one here, a little quote just about the struggle of people developing friendships. Among U.S. adults, about 1 in 3 said that they feel lonely at least once a week. Worse, 1 in 10 Americans say they feel lonely every day, results show. Younger people are more likely to experience loneliness, which is defined as a lack of meaningful or close relationships or sense of belonging. 30% of the respondents ages 18 to 34 said they feel lonely every day or several times a week. What do you think about that? What would contribute to that, do you think?
Social media.
Social media. We're going to come back and talk about that in just a minute. On page 3, there's a little section here on social media. But it's interesting that there is within the younger generation this belief that, they've got all kinds of friends, and yet how many of them are truly meaningful friends? So we'll come back and talk about that in just a minute. But it's interesting. Many people, supposedly, according to that study, feel lonely. And I can be honest, I have never, in the last 30 years, being a believer, I don't think I've been ever lonely. So maybe that's just because we're part of the church and that's the joy of it. Notice the next section, does the change in architecture of homes reflect this? Quote here by Kent Hughes in his book, Disciplines of a Godly Man. He's got a little chapter on friendship in that book. He says, it's no longer unusual to not even know the families immediately surrounding your house. The average American family moves 4 times, even when the job does not force it. People move from house to house looking for the elusive something. We lack roots, continuity, and community, all of which is to say that friendship, especially deep friendship, has fallen on hard times. So he's noted some of the changes in architecture. You used to have big porches and big living rooms and big dining rooms, where those things took place. And now you're looking at houses, they don't have those things anymore. They don't have big porches and they don't have big kitchens, and well, maybe some do. But it's maybe a reflection of our culture and where we're at. So notice the next one. Friends, the show Friends. I didn't watch it. I saw a couple episodes and just realized that was probably not a show I wanted to watch, but that has been one of the most popular TV shows in the last 20 years, and there's still reruns. And so why is that show so popular? Does it demonstrate a desire to belong to a group of people like that and really have those close relationships? I'm not advocating for the show, but I'm just saying that people who have really loved that show and are attracted to it and watch it maybe are drawn to that. So living unfriendly and friendless lives is both a rejection of God's purpose for us as His image and a dehumanizing tragedy. This is from Vaughn Roberts' book, True Friendship. So if you're wanting to dig into this a little bit more, there is that little book, Vaughn Roberts, on true friendship. He's written on this topic, and so there's some helpful stuff in there. Very bottom of page 2, interesting as I was looking into this, men don't do as well with this as women do. Men, and I'll be first to admit it, we don't do as good a job with this as our female counterparts. And notice what he says this: men are not helped to form deeper friendships by the widespread social expectation that they should be self-reliant. In a book written by James Wagenvord, designed to help women understand men, he describes the pressure. He says, quote, "He shall not cry, he shall not display weakness, he shall not need affection or gentleness or warmth." Speaking of men, "He shall comfort but not desire comforting, he shall be needed but not need, he shall touch but not be touched, he shall be steel, not flesh, he shall not be inviolate, or he shall be inviolate in his manhood, he shall stand alone." That's kind of the male mantra, right? According to our culture. Unless men are able to resist this unhelpful understanding of masculinity and be able to be vulnerable with each other, they will always have companions but not friends. So Roberts is getting at the fact that men just tend to not do as good a job with us as females. We tend to be more independent, we tend to be more self-reliant, we tend to be not as emotional, and so we probably don't do as good a job with this as we should. So, guys, any thoughts on that? Agree? Disagree? Then notice some challenges in our current culture that make friendship more difficult. Increased mobility. I alluded to this a little bit before. People often used to live in the same house or at least the same geographical area for decades, if not their entire lives, thus preserving long-lasting friendships. But today, most people are more transient, moving from job to job and place to place in their lives. And then notice this little phrase here: more and more people live in cities, leading to proximity without community. It's an interesting phrase, proximity without community. You live together, you live close by people, there's people all around you, but without close relationships. So I would ask you, do you have that? Is that characteristic of you? Proximity to a lot of people, but without community, without fellowship, without relationships, without friendships. So this is an endemic in our culture. Then, as we just said a moment ago, technological advances can contribute to the difficulty in developing friendships. These can certainly bring relational benefits, but they have also led to an increase in isolation. We have too often allowed gadgets to take the place of deeper communication with other human beings rather than to assist it. This results in being more emotionally engaged with the characters in a game than with the people they meet in real life. They have the illusion of social interaction without the reality. We're in danger of raising a generation that finds it hard to relate to others because it has so little experience doing so. Notice this next section here. We need to recognize there's a difference between friending relationships that are conducted almost exclusively in cyberspace and friendship. In friending, more is always better, but in friendship, it is quality, not quantity, that matters. If we just have companions, but very few or no real friends, we're heading for trouble. So what he's getting at here is this tendency in social media to have all kinds of friends, all kinds of connections, all kinds of Instagram contacts or whatever, and yet no relationship. And I see this with some young people. They spend most of their life online. They never get out of the house. They never get into real life relationships. They don't get into face-on-face conversations, and they don't develop friendships and close relationships as a result of that. So that makes it more difficult. And then this another one here: fewer spiritual connections. Fewer and fewer people are truly engaged in a church family, and those who are often not involved in a church where there's a robust body life, which leads to fewer genuine spiritual friendships. So again, just the need to be part of the church, the need to be part of a healthy church, the need to be part of a church that is robust in its body life and developing relationships and discipleship and engaging in the one another's, and all of that contributes. But if you're not connected that way, it's going to be more difficult. So all that to say, those are some things that mitigate against this, that you're going to have to fight against and kind of have to deal with. So any thoughts on any of that stuff? Do you have friends in your life? Let me ask you this way: do you have friends in your life? Or are you this kind of friend to another person? I think these are some of the applications and implications that we're going to need to think about here as we dive into this. Are you this kind of friend? And do you have people in your life that will speak truth to you, that you're transparent with? And we're going to get into Proverbs here in just a moment. That's going to kind of bring some of this out. But those are some of the questions I want you thinking about as we're going through this. Do you have these kinds of friends? And are you being this kind of friend? Terry?
I do think in the decade that Mike and I are in, it's easier for us to understand what this type of friendship is, because that's what we always had. And now as we're here, we're finding that it takes so much more intentionality because of the dynamics and the environment and our ages and all of these things, that we have to be extremely purposeful and be in cross-generational groups, and it's hard because there are times in our age group, we feel a little bit intimidated because I have to hand my phone to my son or my grandson and say, can you fix this? You know? And so you have a lot of that happening,
Yeah.
which kind of, but it just, it really does take unselfish intentionality over and over and over again. And if you feel like you're not getting anywhere, you have to go somewhere else and keep coming back and go somewhere else and keep coming back and just, be really intentional, but also careful.
Yeah. So what's different now than 40, 50 years ago? Is it?
The availability of information is just, like our youngest son says, there is no excuse for anybody to be an idiot anymore if you have access to internet somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, and he's true. You can research anything you need to you have some questions about, which seems wonderful, but you no longer have need to reach out to somebody that makes an incredible pie crust. And you wanna know how to make that pie crust, you just go online, best pie crust in the world,
Mhm.
and you got 45 options.
Yeah.
Oh.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so that is, I think, the piece that, not seeking, being really intentional about it. And who knows, reaching out to that person who makes incredible pie crust might be the start of a really fun relationship,
Sure.
a really fun friendship.
Sure.
So I think the technology and the information overload and access to any YouTube video. I mean, I know somebody that learned to draw blood on a YouTube video, and she passed the test.
Remind me
the
not
next
to
day.
get my blood drawn by that person.
You know, again,
Wow.
yeah.
And I think, I mean, kinda like what you said with guys, I mean, I guess to echo what Terry said, is that you're not gonna fall into accidentally have great, deep relationships with people.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen on accident. There has to be intentionality, there has to be
Yep.
the purposeful pursuit of it, and, watering the relationship and, pursuing relationships with people. And especially with guys, I think it is easy to fall into the role in there is a rightful place where you're working and you're going home, and you're either at work or there's, especially when you've got young kids, you're not gonna have a ton of social activities to
Right.
go to, but that's why I think the relationships with guys in the church are so important. You can do life on life ministry, whether it's somebody that's in the same stage of life that you're in, or perhaps a stage ahead, or, a generational difference. But just being able to do life together is where you're gonna
Mhm.
build relationships, but it's only gonna be as good as you make it. I mean, if there's a facade of, it's all good, everything's great, don't ask me too many questions, I won't ask you too many questions, and I think that can really happen, that can be a real
Yeah.
danger, because you go into church and into a relationship, and if there's a front the whole time, there's not gonna be that depth that actually comes when you're humble, and
Yeah.
you are transparent, you're honest, and you kinda allow yourself to be, challenged
Yeah.
spiritually, and that just doesn't happen. You don't wake up and that just be true.
Yeah, so if you're always holding people at an arm's length, you're always trying to keep them from getting too close to you, there will never be a close friendship there. Yeah.
And sometimes you gotta go through hard things in a relationship you gotta have hard conversations with people, and, work through things like that,
Yeah.
and then that can actually lead to a deeper relationship.
Absolutely.
Rather than just always being smooth sailing
Yeah.
every moment.
And let's face it, no relationship is smooth sailing. That doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a smooth relationship. Anytime you put people together in a close marriage, friendship, work relationship, whatever it is, there's going to be problems. There's going to be conflict, just because we're sinners. And so you put us together in those kinds of close situations, you're going to have to work at these things. They don't come naturally, right? They're just not something that happens without work. I like the words you're using: intentionality, purposeful, working through conflict. I mean, all of that is essential to a healthy relationship anyway, but especially a friendship.
one more piece, grace. You have to offer grace freely. If you can't you can't create things between the lines, make assumptions that aren't there. You have to offer grace in a relationship that's not where you'd like it to be, or it's not going somewhere. That person might not be ready for that type of friendship or whatever, but you also intentionality with grace.
Yeah. Yep. Well said.
I feel like on top of this analogy, the younger kids right now, I think COVID really set them back on building relationships. So they were right when they're starting out, go to school or get into activities and things, or they're separated and they're told that the media created fear, and so we had kids that wouldn't even take their mask off when they got home off the bus.
Really?
Yeah, we had neighbors and stuff that would wear it all the way till they got into their house, and like you know, even in their house, you see people driving in their car by themselves. You know, it's just
Yeah.
It just created, separated people. So I think as an adult, it's a little easier, but when you're a kid, if you're 4 or 5,
Yeah.
that really, you try to overcome that.
Yeah. And then you have school that's online, and you're not allowed to engage people for months at a time. Yeah. Yeah. So these are all challenges. Go ahead,
I
Joseph.
was just thinking, I mean, just that has to be, we model for our children what friendship is or is not. And, engaging with people, having people in your home, things like that is extremely important.
Yeah.
And I think, and I've seen people in our church do this really well, where they engage with, it's not just adults talking to adults or kids talking to kids. It's, I appreciate people that come over that engage with our kids.
Yeah.
Talk to our kids and can model friendship. We can model that for them.
Yeah.
And they're not having to just figure that out by themselves. But you're right, there are some obstacles that a lot of people have to try to overcome to have healthy relationships and healthy friendships.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the church is the place to do this, right? If we're not doing this well in the church, where are our kids going to learn it? Where are fellow believers going to learn this? So I think it's incumbent upon us as believers to do this well. So you're using words like intentionality, transparency, hospitality. By the way, those are the words that you're going to see in the last couple of pages, because those are some of the ways that you're going to cultivate these kinds of relationships. And so we in the church have to be doing this well. And again, you can't do this with everybody, but there ought to be people in your life that you're doing this with. And there ought to be 2, 3 people that you say, I can't be close with 450 people, but I can be close with these 2 or these 3. So yeah, Dale, we're going to say something.
Yeah, this is another thing that stands in the way, I think, of relationships. A friend of mine, we were conversing the other day, and he said he was in Shipshewana, and he was eating in the restaurant there, and he said it's interesting. He said this whole group of Amish were sitting at a table. They were all conversing. They were talking back and forth. Other people in the restaurant had their phones out. They weren't talking to each other. They were just looking at their phones.
Yeah. Guess we should all become Amish. But you're right.
We have to put these things away every now and then.
Yeah, you're right. Yep. Lord.
Well, I was just kind of with what Terry was saying. I think just even the patience of even when like people move away and having that persistence to still contact, and it's like Jordan mentioned it, kind of like the viewing it more as like ground to be cultivated. And I think I look back, like I have a lot of sweet new friends in the last like maybe 10 years or so,
Yeah.
but like the ones that have known me for even longer, and to the intentionality that we've, like me and other friends have had to, even though we live states away, finding ways to stay in contact, like those relationships that have like kind of stood the test of time, even though we don't live anywhere near each
Yeah.
other, have ended up being so gold
Yeah.
to me, because it's like we've gone through so many different
Sure.
seasons, and there's been ebb and flow, but it's like we have both mutually have put forth the effort and found ways to keep up with one another. And I feel like more and more that has become really precious, because you go through so many different seasons and challenges with one another, and walking through different things with one another, and that you can't create that overnight. And
Yeah.
so I am thankful for the intentionality that people have put in
Sure.
to stick with me. But yeah, like just, I think that it does have to be viewed as like a, kind of a long game, and you get what you put into it.
It's an investment, right? Relationships are investment.
Mhm.
Like you said, you get out what you put into it. So if you're putting nothing in, you're not going to get anything out. So if you want to have friends, you have to be a friend. And that takes purposeful interactions and intentionality. So, yeah. Let me talk through some of the Proverbs on this, because Proverbs has been called a treatise on friendship, the book itself. It is the book in the Bible that contains probably the most specific teaching on the issue of friendship. And notice this quote here: life is presented in Proverbs as a journey in which we are constantly faced with a choice between two paths, wisdom and folly. We need good friends who will travel with us, help us discern the right road to take, and spur us on to keep walking down it. Such companions will immeasurably strengthen us. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. I think that's why you have this emphasis in Proverbs, because the whole point of the book is live wisely, don't live foolishly. And in living wisely, you need some people in your life that are going to speak to you, that you can develop relationships with, that there can be a mutuality as you and they seek to live wisely. So I guess you could put it this way: if you want to live foolishly, isolate yourself. If you want to live foolishly, pull yourself back from everybody, every influence, every person who can speak truth to your life. That is a spiritual disaster. And no Christian should do that. You have set yourself up for danger if that's your response. God wants you in relationships, and he wants you engaged in relationships with other people who will point you on the path of wisdom. So that's why Proverbs has so much to say about this. So let me just hit some of the things, the principles that Proverbs addresses on this issue of friendship. So notice, first one here: strife destroys friendships. Proverbs 6 things the Lord hates, 7 which are an abomination to him. You know that God hates. There are things God hates. He's not all love. There are things God hates. And he must hate things in order for him to properly love things. If he doesn't hate what is contrary to his nature, he's not loving. So it's appropriate for God to hate things, and he lists, a bunch of them there: haughty eyes, lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that run rapidly to evil, a false witness who utters lies. And notice the last one who spreads strife among brothers. God says, I hate that. That's strong language. I hate the fact that you are sowing discord in relationships. I hate when there's strife between fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. That is something that God loathes. And I think we need to hear this in particular when it comes to all of our relationships, but particularly our friendships. If you are a strife sower, God hates that. And so these kinds of people, as it says at the bottom of page 3, stir up conflict in a family, community, or church. They're divisive, they're disruptive, they're contentious, they're factious, and they create distrust and suspicion. Such strife does great damage to relationships, even destroying relationships and friendships that were once close. And notice this next bullet: whereas God aims to unify and bring together, Satan aims to separate. So believers are never more like Satan when they sow discord in relationships. And so that's something that we really need to kind of grasp. If there's discord, if you're contributing to that discord, if you are not being a peacemaker, as Matthew 5:9 says, if you're not seeking to promote reconciliation, if there's not movement towards forgiveness and granting that and asking for that, if there's not these attempts to resolve the relational discord and you're doing things to contribute to that, that's pretty serious. That separates friends. Notice this quote here, again or this one's by Louis Goldberg in The Wisdom of Proverbs. He says, troublemakers take delight in stirring up fights between various parties. Petty jealousies can embitter families. False rumors can undermine and divide churches. Many units of society can be broken by the troublemaker who shoots his poison of strife into the midst of his group. This is serious. If you're a strife monger, if you're one who is constantly or repeatedly being contentious and sowing strife, you're dividing relationships, not unifying them. You're separating friends, not bringing them together. So that's one of the things that the Proverbs tells us. Okay, number 2, gossip and slander destroy friendships. Proverbs 16:28, a perverse man spreads strife, and a slanderer separates intimate friends. Notice what divides friends? Slander divides friends. Proverbs 17:9, he who conceals a transgression seeks love, but he who repeats a matter separates intimate friends. So notice the term friends used in both of those verses. What destroys those friendships? Gossip and slander. So let's think about these. What are these terms? What's flattery? Let's do that one first. What's flattery? It's saying something to someone's face that you would never say behind their back. What's gossip? The exact opposite. Saying something behind their back that you would never say to their face. Right? So then slander. What's slander? It is the purposeful passing on of information, whether true or false, that seeks to erode or destroy that person's reputation in the eyes of others. Right? So think about each one of those. Flattery, gossip, and slander. We're thinking mostly about gossip and slander here. Those will separate intimate friends. And I just wonder, if we took a poll here tonight, how many of you would say, I have relationships that have been destroyed by gossip and slander? I think probably most of us can point back to something in our past with our friendships and relationships that is the result of gossip and slander. Those relationships and friendships are not what they once were because of that. So notice what Robert says here. If a friend does me the honor of opening up to me about something very private and personal, my lips must be sealed. Too often we break confidences in subtle ways by hinting at some information we are privy to. Saying, for example, I can't say much, but between you and me, there's issues with Jane. If you use that phrase, between you and me, like there should be big red flags going off. Like that's a sign, wait, you shouldn't be heading down that road because you're probably saying something you shouldn't. We may feel that we've given no secrets away, but the context of the conversations makes it clear what we mean. Once others discover that we are not able to keep our mouths shut in this way, they will make sure that they do not share anything significant with us, and we will find it much harder to develop close relationships. So if you're a person who has a hard time developing close friendships and relationships, maybe a place to start is asking yourself the question, do I gossip and slander about those people? Because eventually you become known for those things, and people won't want to associate with you, and you won't have good friends if you're betraying close information. So yeah, Rachel.
I guess what's the balance? So like the first sentence, it says, if a friend does me the honor of opening up to me about something very private and personal, would that person then not be slandering or gossiping? Because they're opening up about a personal situation, so that in that regard it's not gossip or slander? I mean,
I think he means if a friend comes to you and opens up about something that they're struggling with, they're entrusting something to you, they're being transparent with you, they're saying, this is something that really burdens my soul and I need someone to help me think through that. If it's just about me personally, that's not slander. Okay. I think what you're getting at though is, what if it involves another person, right?
I mean,
yeah.
The verse that talks about, bear one another's burdens with each other. How do you do that if you can't talk about it?
Yeah, I think there's a balance there, and I think I think motive is key, and motives are a messy, hard thing to evaluate. But if your motive is to slant that person's opinion about this other person, and you're going to share a little thing that may plant some seeds of suspicion in their mind about that person, and you're wanting to, pass that information on, that's a wrong motive. But if a person's coming to you saying, I am really struggling with this relationship, can I tell you some things? I don't want to gossip, I don't want to slander, but I'm stuck. I really need some wisdom here. And maybe they try to keep it as generic as possible, share as few details and not give names. But if a person's coming to you with that attitude, I think there's a place for that. I think in relationships with believers, we do that. We have those conversations. We ask for help. We need wisdom. We bear each other's burdens. We get counsel, right? Proverbs talks about a wisdom of multitude of counselors in which there's much wisdom. So the implication is if you need wisdom, you can go share some of those things. But again, the motive is the key. There's a fine line there.
I think we know that in our hearts when
Right.
we have that tantalizing piece of information that our heart is so wicked, even as believers, so deceitful that we want to be in an elevated position to where we're the people with the information about some situation, or like kind of like what you're describing, where we want to elevate ourselves by making somebody else look bad. And you just in your own heart of hearts, you would never verbalize these things, but you hear about somebody else's struggle, and your heart immediately you feel a little better about yourself.
Yeah.
And you wanna continue that and share that with other people.
Yeah.
And it shows the wickedness of our own heart and the deceitfulness of our own heart.
Yeah.
Because God hates that, because
Yeah.
it's really do nothing from selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility count others more important than yourself. That's the opposite of that.
Yeah.
And when we, thinking about actions and our words and then our actual motives, as believers, we need to be very conscious of our motives when we approach situations like that, because it is kind of difficult at times to lay out a legalistic, this is right, this is wrong, more of what is your heart motive behind it. But I think as believers we need to be able to discern between those two things.
Yeah.
And discern between, because it is tough to know what is me going for wisdom, and you could even cloak it in I'm seeking wisdom, but you're actually looking to gossip, or
Yeah.
cloak it in spiritual terms. Can you pray for Jane or whoever it is?
Yeah.
But what are we really looking for?
You have to be extremely wise in these situations, and I think that's where discernment and maturity comes in. If you're not wise, you might swing the pendulum to gossip, and if you're not wise, you might swing the pendulum to not getting counsel when you need counsel, right? So that's where just great wisdom and maturity, I think, comes in there. But motive is the key. Yeah, Kylie.
What was the definition of slander again?
Slander is passing on of information, whether true or false, with the intention of destroying another person's reputation.
So there has to be that intentionality.
Yeah, I think in slander, there's always a motive, there's always a desire to run the person's reputation down in the eyes of other people. So there is that. It's not just generic, hey, did you hear about it? There's always a motive to destroy character and destroy reputation. Yeah.
I think there's too a difference between I just go back to what you were saying of getting counsel. I think being really particular and careful with who you get counsel from, because I think it would be easy to say I'm trying to get counsel or whatever, but you're you're really just kind of almost like trying to find people to band with you.
Yeah.
And so I think even just, even really thoughtfully thinking through, you know, who's someone older and wiser in my life that I already have an established relationship with, who knows me really well, who knows my sin points and knows my weaknesses, and can speak into this, and keeping it really a small circle, and not going from person to person, you know, like, cause it's like, I think, cause then, and I think getting more counsel from more people, if it gets too large, it can get really confusing, cause
Yeah.
people will give different counsel, you know,
Yeah.
so I think even just sticking with people who you have observed have a very close walk
Yeah.
with the Lord, who are spiritually mature, who love the Word,
Yeah.
and who know you really well, and
Yeah.
who have even maybe called you out. I think those are the people that I entrust myself with, when it's like they know my weaknesses, so they can call me out
Yep.
if I'm not thinking clearly in a situation. And so like
Yeah.
not even I don't know, keeping your counselor group small.
Yeah, it's really wise, Lauren. The human nature's tendency is to surround ourselves with people who will affirm us. So we will go to the people who will say, "Oh, you're right. They're so wrong. You did everything right. The onus is on them. They're 100% responsible for that situation." And so that feels good to us. That makes it feel like, okay, I'm not responsible here. And you need to go ask people for wisdom who will speak truth to you, whether you like it or not. We're going to get to a Proverbs here in just a minute. That this is what true friends will do, right? They will speak the truth to you, even if it hurts. So some people will go from person to person to person to person, and they'll get as many options and opinions, and they'll think, okay, well, what's the best opinion in all of those, or what's the greatest consensus? And sometimes that's helpful, but frankly, you just need to go to the people that you trust the most, that, as you're saying, exhibit maturity and are going to give you biblical counsel and know your heart and know the truth and can bring the word to bear upon those situations. So very well said. Dan?
Forgive me if this is too obvious, but it's not. Don't we need to separate slander out from, say, giving wise counsel to someone who is in an abusive relationship?
Yes.
Something that would not be a friendship. There's not an actual mutuality, even if there's a surface level, "Hey, I'm your friend, even though I'm mistreating you," sort of thing. So.
Flesh that out a little bit more.
So, if there's an abusive relationship or a mistreating relationship, one person might be still saying that they're a friend of the person that they're mistreating. So if you are counseling the person who's being mistreated, you're going to probably make point out some facts that might be true about the person who is mistreating. But that has got to be, it must be different from slander. Because I think about also like with, 1 Corinthians is a book all about unity. And in it, Paul is counseling repeatedly, separate from this, separate from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those are dicey, difficult situations, abusive situations, and they're so hard to figure out. We've dealt with a number of them here, and they're always messy and thorny and hard. But yeah, when there's abuse, when you can establish there's abuse in a relationship, that needs what?
Then it's not a friendship?
Then it's not a friendship.
Okay.
No, that's not a friendship. A person who's abusing another person, I mean, Colossians 3 talks about abusive speech, right? So he says put that off. So if there's abusive speech, let alone sexual abuse, physical abuse, spiritual abuse, those are things that are very serious. In fact, there's laws against those things, right? So that's not a friend. That's someone who's taking advantage of another individual. So that's probably in another category of relationships. But yeah, those are very serious.
I think about church discipline. You do have to bring another person in, and you have to, if you're going to follow the steps of church discipline, there's going to be more people that hear about the sins of an individual.
Right.
But I think the heart behind it isn't, let me give you this tantalizing morsel of information. It's how can we restore this person?
Right.
I'm concerned about this person spiritually.
Right.
How do we restore them? And go into them with a spirit of gentleness, not a spirit of how can I elevate myself relative to them.
Right.
Which I think is kind of what you're saying is, if there's a situation where there's somebody who's violating somebody else, and there's somebody who's, you got a perpetrator and a victim, and it's not, it would be wrong, and maybe even there'd be a fear of man for them to just continue in that victim relationship without seeking help and actually allowing the perpetrator to continue in the pattern of sin. And so bringing other people in, but that's, the spirit of that is so different than just your generic slander.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say to a person who's in an abusive relationship, you need to tell somebody. You need some help. You need to break that abuse. There's an abuse cycle. You need to break that abuse cycle, and you need probably some help to do that. A person in the church, authorities. So you need some help to do that. So that's not slander. You're not trying to destroy the person's reputation. If there's genuine abuse taking place, you need to get some help in that. So, yeah. Did you have your hand up? Okay. All right, so gossip and slander. Then another principle here in the middle of page 4, some friendships are superficial and eventually fade away. So just interesting here, Proverbs 19:4, wealth adds many friends, but a poor man is separated from his friends. I don't know if you ever had more money that you knew what to do with, but suddenly you have all kinds of friends when you are in that position. Proverbs 19:6, many will seek the favor of a generous man, and every man is a friend to him who gives gifts. So some relationships are just built on superficial. I can get something from you, so I want to hang out with you. I want to hobnob with you. I want to be your friend because I can get something from you. So Proverbs addresses the fact that some relationships and friendships are just merely superficial. However, having said that, the next one, true friends can become closer than family. Look at Proverbs 18:24, a man of too many friends comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. I love that. Within the body of Christ, you can actually have relationships and friendships that are closer than blood. And I would imagine for many of you sitting here in the room, that's the case. You are closer with people here in this church or other believers in your life that you have a much more close relationship with than people in your own biological family. And that's just the way it is. That's the bond that we have in Christ that does that. So the implication, I think, of this proverb is you should strive to develop those kinds of relationships. You should hopefully have a friend in your life who sticks closer than a brother. So do you have that kind of person? And are you that kind of person to another person, another fellow believer? And then bottom of page 4, true friends remain through trials. This may be what, Lauren, you were getting at a little bit. Proverbs 17:17, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. So real friends will stick with you through thick and thin. Real friends will be there in the mud and the muck and the hardship and the difficulties. They'll probably see you at your worst, at your lowest point in life, and they're there. They love you. That doesn't put them off. They walk through those trials with you. Those are the kind of people that are your true friends. A brother is born for adversity. And some of the deepest, closest friendships are forged in those times. When you go through just hard seasons and there's someone that sticks with you and someone that cares for you and someone that walks with you. I think back on some of the trials that we went through 30 years ago, and those are some of the dearest people still. After 3 decades, and they live on the other side of the country, and we hardly see them, but we see them and we pick right back up because there was adversity, and they walked with us, and they cried with us, and they mourned with us, and that's what true friends are. They stick closer than a brother, and they labor with you through those difficult times. Top of page 5, they also need to be maintained. So we've kind of addressed this a little bit. Relationships require attention to keep them healthy. Notice Proverbs 27:10, do not forsake your own friend or your father's friend, and do not go to your brother's house in the day of your calamity. Better is a neighbor who is near than a brother far away. Notice the connection there, the comparison. Better a neighbor who's close to you, they're engaged in a relationship with you, than someone who's maybe related to you but is far off and not really connected to you. So relationships need time. They need to be nurtured. They need to be developed. And related to this then is number 6 or 7 here. True friends will speak truth even if it hurts. These are some very important verses here. Proverbs 27:6, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. Proverbs 27:9, oil and perfume make the heart glad, so a man's counsel is sweet to his friend. So I love particularly Proverbs 27:6, faithful are the wounds of a friend. Do you have friends in your life who will wound you? Who will say the hard things to you? Who will get in your kitchen lovingly, stand in your face and say, I love you, but you need to hear this. That's a true friend, because that is really hard to do. None of us like to do that. None of us like to have those hard conversations. None of us like to, say the hard things. It's just difficult. Nobody likes to engage in those kinds of difficult conversations. It's going to be hurtful. It's going to sting. I know someone who will frequently preface a difficult conversation with these words, I'm going to say something that's going to sting. But I love you. And you need to know I love you. That's a true friend. Their motive is not to harm you. It's not to hurt you. Their motive is not to slander you or gossip you. It's kind of the start of church discipline, right? What's that first stage? You see someone trapped in sin. You see a character flaw. You see something going on in their heart or their life where you say, that's not going to end well. And so you have a friend in your life who will say the hard things to you. So number one, do you have that kind of friend who will, because they love you, they're not just going to be a yes person, a yes man, a yes woman. They're going to say it to your face. They're going to say what needs to be said. So do you have that friend, and are you that friend? Or are you just, everything's fine, everything's perfect, never rock the boat, never, address difficult things? That's not really a true friend. You might be able to placate everything for a while and smooth everything over, but actually a true friend is going to say, can we talk? Because I'm concerned. And I see this in your life. Now, you have to check your own life. Remember, get the log out of your own eye before you have to take a speck out of someone else's eye. It's not a license to just go and confront every single person that you see. But the question is, do you have those kind of people in your life, and are you that kind of friend? Look at the quote here from Roberts. He says, if true intimacy is to develop, we must be willing to be honest in talking to our friends, and not only about our own failings, but also when appropriate about theirs. Very often, it is love for myself and a fear of being badly received rather than a love for my friend that holds me back from speaking an uncomfortable truth to him. But if I only praise him and never point out any faults, I am certainly not helping him. If our friends are forever telling us how wonderful we are and never pointing out our weaknesses, which they, more than anyone, are in a position to see, they're setting a trap for us. So, thoughts on this? How do you do this? Yeah, Kylie.
2 questions with it. How does it work if you're a newer Christian and you're kind of the one that's the mess in the friendship, if you will? What's the balance on corrective? I mean, you could, just drop anything, drop a tack, and it's gonna hit something. So how do you not, hit every single thing and just everything is a nail and you are a hammer?
That is a good question. Well, I would say, first of all, is that how God deals with us? I mean, are you not grateful that God doesn't hit every nail in your life immediately? I mean, we're in the process of sanctification for decades. And aren't you thankful that he didn't, when you became a Christian, suddenly nail you for every single thing that's wrong in your life? What does God do? He's gracious, he's patient, he's kind, he's gentle. So I think we have to pattern this reality after how God does this for us. I mean, there's things, I'm pretty sure that there's still things in my life that I'm not fully aware of. I've been a believer 30 years, 34 years. And there's been a lot of sanctification over those years, and I think he's graciously made me aware of the big things in my life. I think there's still some small things somewhere. Well, there's probably some big things too that need some growth and maturity and some sanctification, and yet he's still slowly, graciously sanctifying me. So I would say, in your scenario, if your friend is just hammering you on every single thing without being gracious and kind and letting you grow and patiently helping you along the way, that's maybe not true friendship. True friends are going to walk with you through those things. They're going to be there patiently dealing with you and helping you navigate those things. I know. I know what you're saying.
And then the second question is that if you're also a newer Christian and you're in the church, there's a strong likelihood that you're going to be friends with somebody that's more mature. So how does that dynamic work when you look at things that they're ahead? Like you're as an apprentice electrician, it would be like me going to a journeyman and being like, hey man, like you're doing this wrong. How does that dynamic work within the body of believers with, kind of the different levels of salvation?
So like an older, mature saint, how do they respond to the younger?
Yeah, if you're
saint?
friends with somebody that's more mature than you, and you go, hey, I think there might be something that you're not seeing in your life, but I don't know, am I even qualified?
Oh, so you're talking about a younger believer who might see something in an older, more mature believer's life.
Yeah.
Oh, good question. Well, I would say, first of all, just make sure that you're accurate. I mean, certainly no believer has arrived this side of heaven. So if you genuinely, I would say you got to give it some time. You got to see if this is a pattern. You've got to see if this is truly a one-off thing. I mean, everyone's snapshot at certain stages in our life looks pretty bad, right? I mean, think back on some of the snapshots of your life. So I would say be careful that you don't just look at a snapshot and say, wow, this person's got a major character flaw. Look at the video. If the video of their life is consistently this issue, then as a younger believer, if you see those things, you have every right and obligation and responsibility to say something to them. I think that's what a good friend does. So just because they're older and maybe more mature doesn't mean that they're exempt from having still some sin issues in their life. So you might be the friend that addresses that in their life. So does that make sense? Dan?
And Proverbs 9:8 comes to mind on this too. That a righteous man loves reproof, loves to be shown.
Yeah.
I really want that to be true of me.
Yeah.
The more mature believer should want that.
Yeah, that's well said. You shouldn't be intimidated if you're the younger believer to say, I'm not sure I should bring this. But Dan's point is well taken. If the older, mature believer is truly a more mature believer, they're going to welcome that. They're going to say, thank you. I needed that. Thanks for saying the hard things. So, yeah, Ralph.
So we're talking about helping people where there are difficulties, but there's also the fact that there are people who are natural encouragers, artificers. And I think the common thinking is you need 10 compliments, 10 good things for everything that is the observation that needs some attention.
Yeah.
And we tend in this society to be, it's easier to point out the stuff rather than the encouragement.
Yeah.
And I think all of us, and that doesn't mean everything has to be a sandwich of, well, this is really great. You got a big problem here, but this is really great. It isn't that necessarily.
Yeah.
But we do need, as people, I think we do need encouragement.
Yeah. Yeah, and what is love? What does love want? The love wants what's best. Love wants what's best for that person. right? So on the one hand, the person who's giving it is doing it and should do it in love. The person who's receiving it should receive it in love. So if love is a part of that relationship, if love defines that relationship, then these can be hard things, but they ought to be good things. This ought to be happening frequently within the body of Christ, right? I mean, I say frequently that step one of church discipline should be happening probably on a weekly basis in our church. That's just the way it should be. That's normal body life, where you're having those conversations. Doesn't mean you're a policeman and you're out looking for all these things, but I'm just saying that these types of conversations should be the norm, not the exception.
I mean, I think obviously the general pattern in Scripture is the older men teaching younger men, older women teaching younger women. But there are examples in, 1 Timothy, he's to be, even though he's young, he's to be an example for the whole church in purity and in his speech and faith and all these things. And so being young, and then there are people who are younger believers who run circles around people who've been professing believers for decades.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen that in, not necessarily at Maranatha, but at other churches where there are people who've been believers for a long time, but they're still baby believers,
right,
in a lot of ways. And so I think it's spiritual time as a professing believer does not necessarily equal spiritual maturity.
It doesn't.
And so, and you think about even just Matthew 18, church discipline, it doesn't say if you're a more mature believer, if you've been a believer longer, then you can go. If I mean, even Galatians 6. The assumption is that you who are spiritual and there's somebody who's taught you to go and help them.
Right.
But if we're a true believer and we have the Spirit and we have His Word, we have the tools necessary to observe right and wrong and
Exactly.
discern between right and wrong.
That's just normal church life.
Normal church life.
That's the one another's. The one another's are not from mature believer to immature believer. Those define every relationship in the church. So they ought to be
But
taken.
obviously, you don't want to be the brand new believer guy who's the sin police and
Right.
going around and causing problems that way
Right.
either. There's maybe a lack of humility there.
Exactly. Yep. Last proverb here. True friends are considerate. Proverbs 27:14. He who blesses his friend with a loud voice early in the morning, it will be reckoned a curse to him. So that's a kind of a funny proverb. So true friends are considerate. They consider others. All right. Well, last few minutes here. Examples of some biblical friendships. I'm just going to hit these fairly quickly. David and Jonathan, maybe the best example of true friendship, and I'll let you kind of read over those notes on your own. But basically, Jonathan was a man after God's own heart. He was zealous for the Lord. He was passionate for the things of the Lord, and he found in David someone like him, and he found a heart that was just like his. Notice on page 6, here's just some characteristics of true biblical friendship. So notice there was a shared conviction between them. 1 Samuel 18:1. It came about when he had finished speaking to Saul that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. I love that phrase. Souls knit together. Why? Because there was this instant connection. They loved the same things. They were passionate about the Lord. They were passionate about the glory of His name. They viewed life the same way. And so because of that, instantly their hearts were knit together, right? So there's this common conviction. Then there's this shared love. Notice 1 Samuel 18:1 goes on to say, and Jonathan loved him as himself. So he truly loved David. There was the conviction they shared. There was a mutual affection that they shared. Then they had a same commitment. 1 Samuel 18:3 and 4, Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David with his armor, including his sword and his bow and his belt. Jonathan knew that David was meant to be king. And so he was willing to say, you know what, it's yours, it's not mine. Notice this quote here by Hughes, he says, the deepest of friendships have in common this desire to make the other person royalty. They work for, rejoice in others' elevation and achievements. There are no hooks in the friendship, no desire to manipulate or control, no jealousy or exclusiveness, simply a desire for the best for the other. I love that. Jonathan saw in David the man that he was called to be the king, and so he said, I want to make sure that you're exalted into that position. There was no competition. There was no vying for achievement or recognition. Jonathan was like, David, you're God's man, and he wasn't trying to manipulate or control the situation. So that's a true friend. True friends try to help each other become all that God desires for them. And then a shared loyalty. They kind of committed to one another to take care of each other should something happen to one another. Top of page 7, loyalty is indispensable to the survival of friendship. So how many once prosperous friendships have faded because of disloyal talk? You will never know a deep friendship unless there's mutual loyalty and trust. You will never know deep friendship unless there's mutual loyalty and trust. And then notice a shared encouragement. Jonathan encouraged David in the things of the Lord. So they were connected spiritually at the heart. So that's the air that they breathe. That's what true friends engage in. There's this mutual encouragement, mutual affection, mutual stimulation of one another to love and good deeds. So if you just had that example, you've had some great principles there as it relates to what true friendship is. You can have Paul and Timothy, you can look at their example, their friendship, and you can look at the friendship between Paul and Epaphroditus as well, some similar qualities. So again, I would just ask you, do you display these qualities? Loyalty, commitment, love, encouragement, transparency, trust. These are the foundations upon which true friendships are built. All right, so how do you cultivate these kinds of relationships? Just very quickly, I think you should pray for opportunities to develop them. If you don't have friends like this, you should pray that the Lord brings you a friend. He loves to answer those kinds of requests. There should be a friendliness. If you want to have a friend, you must be a friend. Notice this quote from Hughes. He says, no matter what our disposition, we need to work at friendliness. So kind of getting back to our words, intentionality and purposeful. You have to work at this. We need to ask questions. Let me just say something on that. If you want to have a friend, let me just tell you one easy way to do that. Mm-hmm. Stop talking about yourself and make it your objective to let the other person do all the talking. I promise you, you will have more friends than you know what to do with it. Ask questions. Listen to them and engage them. Don't make it about you. This is not about you and your life and how great you are. Ask them questions, and you will have more friends than you know what to do with. We need to place ourselves in situations where friendships happen. If you're a regular church attender but do no more than attend morning worship, you're depriving yourself and the church of the friendship so desperately needed. This was written to men, but he says we must place ourselves in the ways of friendship. Bible studies, adult class, groups, retreats, service in the church. So take the initiative. Be friendly. So pray, friendliness, love. Love must characterize your friendships. It's the second greatest commandment. You need to love others as you love yourself, right? So there has to be a mutual love for one another. Then there has to be transparency. You need to be prepared to be open with people. Share your hopes, your fears, your passions. Be willing to take some risks and open yourself up and say, here's what I'm struggling with. Here's some of my deepest fears. Here's some of the things I'm concerned about. Here's what I'm wrestling with. Here's what keeps me up at night. If you are willing to expose some of those things, I think you will find that people, if they're a true friend, they will be sympathetic with you, and you will find them reciprocating and saying some of the things they're struggling with. That's what develops friendships, right? Transparency. Being a good listener, top of page 9, you need to be a good listener if you're gonna have good friends. Kind of talked about that. Hospitality, using your home as a place to minister to others. Have people over, invite people over. Use your home as a place to minister. And then commitment. There's a place for declarations of commitment and love, but these qualities will often develop naturally as we demonstrate them by our actions. Rather than waiting for others to take the initiative, we can do so ourselves in countless ways, single, married, not least by prioritizing time to see friends. Given the many demands on us, that may require making a regular commitment rather than simply waiting for a moment when we're both free, which may happen rarely. So you've got to plan for this, you've got to strategize for this, you've got to be intentional with this. So my voice is about done. Questions, thoughts? Terry?
Sometimes you make your house available for somebody else to have others over.
How do you do that? You just say, my house is open, come
Yep.
use it.
Say, do you wanna ask a bunch of your friends over because you're not in a position in your living situation, apartment, or whatever it is to have it over yet?
So I hear party at the Gordons. Sounds wonderful.
And we say, we'll go watch a movie or something, the place is yours.
That works.
Yeah.
Erica, what did you say?
I was just gonna say, when that vulnerability, I think it's important to tell our friends straight up that they have the freedom to speak when they see you head in the wrong direction. So
Yep.
I had a friend once where we were talking about this type of stuff, and I said, if I was heading the wrong direction, would you stop me? Would you tell me? No, that's not my place. And I thought, we can be friends, but we won't be close friends, because I need people to say, whoa, Erica, look what you're doing,
Yeah.
smack me upside the head if necessary, but
Yep,
we have to give freedom, I think, in that, so.
it's good.
Sounds like the person doesn't actually love you, you know, so the loving thing would
Yeah.
be to, in a situation like that, would be to say something. I
Yeah.
mean, the old proverbial, if somebody's driving off a bridge and you don't say stop, that's not loving.
No.
Just because you don't wanna slow them down. I mean, that's not loving at all.
Right. All right. Hope that's helpful. Probably nothing new, but it's good to think about it, good to see what Scripture says about it. So thank you for coming, venturing out in the storm, and coming tonight. So we'll see you next week for this class. We'll tackle one more week before we break for Christmas. So see you next week.
You guys have done that, good.
What?